Hello everybody and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips, and just a couple of announcements. First of all, it is soon going to be fall semester, believe it or not, at Wellness Forum Institute. So if you're thinking of enrolling in courses, pursuing professional development, or want to have a conversation with me about it or a follow-up conversation, pampopper@msn.com, happy to help you navigate and figure out what you want to do and the best way to do it. If nothing else, we've been in this business for 25 years, and I don't think we know everything, but we sure have had a lot of practice. And if I can just provide any guidance to you or tell you what to expect if you wanted to do something like this, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. So you got my email address, send me an email. And then we have some great courses coming up, ALS, fibromyalgia, Cancer 201, and our conference in November, which is going to happen, come hell or high water. It's going to happen in person, all of us in the same room here in Columbus, and we have backup plans and all of that in place too. So I hope you're going to join us. It's our 25th anniversary celebration, and we're going to have a celebration. We really are. So anyway, some things to report, and then I'm going to get to some things that are really concerning. You know, I just do a little bit of what's coming next because I think it's kind of frightening. So according to the CDC, and this is the week of July 13th, based on death certificate data, the percentage of deaths attributed to pneumonia, influenza, or COVID-19, now notice how they put all those three together, has decreased for the 11th straight week. So they acknowledge that it's been going down, which begs the question. You know, I've been talking to you for yesterday and the day before about all these draconian measures and everything else. If the death rate is going down, what the heck are we doing? Why are we wearing masks? We've flattened the curve, apparently, whatever the heck that means, but the death rate's been going down for 11 weeks, yet the restrictions are being piled on more and more and more and more. So the percentage is currently, this is on the CDC's website, below the epidemic threshold. We're not having an epidemic anymore. So the emperors and empresses, sooner or later, you're going to have to give it up. And I know you really like this powerful position you're in. Little tiny Mike DeWine standing at the microphone, just hanging on to every last bit of power here in Ohio. And I know the other ones are the same way. They almost look like they're possessed when they get in front of the camera these days. But 11 weeks of decline in the death rate, and the states are imposing more and more requirements. That's why we need to sue these people. That's why we need to sue these people and make them produce data justifying what they're doing. I want to see the Emperor DeWine in a court of law, or some surrogate, because he'll probably be too cowardly to show up himself, justify all this masking and everything else. I think on Tuesday of this week there were 12 people in the hospital in Ohio for COVID, 12 total. And the nitwit was thinking of locking down the state, didn't do it, but masks, he begged people to wear masks and reminded us on Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever day it was, how dangerous a barbecue is. We have to sacrifice today in order to have it tomorrow. Barbecues are dangerous. I don't know how the guy gets up there with a straight face. But they added a caveat at the bottom. They think that the death rate could change as more death certificates come in, which is interesting because the White House notified the CDC, speaking of the death rates, that they want the hospitals to report directly to them. And this has caused apoplectic seizures by CDC officials who have also like their power as much as the emperors do, by the way. They don't want to give it up. And there are several elected officials in Congress who have said, the only agency who can collect data is CDC. Well, you might remember a few weeks ago, I talked about nursing home data that the CDC clearly manipulated because people were calling from nursing homes who they were calling news outlets and saying, look, I'm the person who reported the data, and I'm telling you we had no COVID cases, and the CDC now lists us as having 786. So I think it's about time the White House took the reporting away from CDC and started gathering it themselves. This will be done through the Department of Health and Human Services so that you don't become apoplectic. It's not like somebody's going to be sitting at the White House switchboard gathering this. They put HHS in charge of it, and maybe we'll start to see some accurate data. Now, speaking of inaccurate data, let's talk about fake data from Florida. According to an investigation in Florida, the number of cases is being inflated. The department's numbers were later adjusted, but on one day, 22 labs reported 100% of all of their tests yield positive results, okay? Now, if you know anything about data and statistics, you know that that is a statistical impossibility, okay? Other labs reported less than 100%, but they were equally unbelievable. So, for example, the report showed that 88% of the test results at NCF Diagnostics in Alachua were positive. The positive rate was 98% according to the data at Orlando Health, but when Fox 35 contacted the center, they said, oh, no, it's actually 9.4%. Well, that's a lot different than 98%. Orlando Veterans Medical Center had a positive rate of 76%, but when this TV station called, they reported that it was like 6%. Well, there's a big difference between 76% and 6%. The Florida Department of Health also told Fox 35 News that some smaller private labs were not reporting negative test results to the state. So they've instructed, I think they must have instructed, why would these labs not report to the state? So no negative test results are being reported, labs that had none. But obviously something is wrong, because it would be statistically impossible for 22 labs to have 100% positive rate. So anyway, fake data. And I'll just say this, I get emails from some people who say, you really think that this is just all a hoax, and you know, I don't know, what about this and what about that? And people send me, what about this piece of information from this state or that state? I'm finished analyzing all the stuff that everybody sends me, and the reason is because I've been reporting this since March, first week in March, these data every single week. I've written a dozen really well-referenced articles that have been in the newsletter. I post the transcripts of these to the extent that, and they're rough transcripts, these are not finished articles, but I post them on our member site with the sources and that sort of thing. So I think we don't need to analyze every lie that they came up with. It could be somebody's full-time job, 22 hours a day, and we don't need to do that anymore. You know, it's sort of like if you have a cheating husband who's already been out with 25 women, even if the 26th one isn't, I mean, how many more do we need to investigate, right? What about the 26th one? Well, you know, whether it happened or it didn't happen, who cares? We caught him 25 times, right? Okay, so now let's go on to some things that should frighten everybody a little bit. And I was able to verify this. So there was an ad placed in 2019 for an isolation quarantine enforcement officer. The fee is $25 an hour, and you apply on site as a company, a private company that have been contracted to do this. I'll just read you a little bit of what it says. This is an on-call temporary position to guard established isolation quarantine sites for those found to be at risk to the population relating to COVID-19. This is actually before the epidemic started. Fake epidemic started. In an event, an individual displays intent to violate communicable disease restrictions and/or orders, officers will be called in to enforce the orders and rules of the county health department or any local health officer. Employees will be assigned to 12.5-hour on-call shifts and paid $2 an hour to be ready to be called to the isolation quarantine site. If called into the site, employees will work 8.5-hour shifts and earn $25 an hour. Employees will be provided training and will wear full personal protective equipment, gloves, N95 respirator, face shield, and gown. Essential job functions: wear PPE, meets with individual in quarantine isolation to communicate intent of presence and enforcement strategy, collaborates with on-site staff and/or assigned social worker to identify and resolve challenges to remain in isolation and quarantine, maintains presence and continually applies de-escalation techniques as needed to enforce quarantine isolation orders, participates in communication briefing with incoming, outgoing guard, health officer, and on-site coordinator at end beginning of shift, and so on. So what do you think about that? Isn't that lovely? And this is before anybody in the United States ever had COVID-19. Interesting, yeah? All right, this will also scare the crap out of you. Many New Zealanders, they say, may be locked down for months and perhaps even years. On June 8th, U.S. News and World Report reported that there were no active cases of COVID in New Zealand and that there was a 95% chance that the country had successfully eliminated the virus. Okay? So, but now, Johns Hopkins Center for Systems Science and Engineering reports that there are 1,544 cases and 22 deaths. So an epidemiologist says that thousands of people are going to need to be quarantined in isolation for months and perhaps even years. Quote, we're going to have thousands of people sitting in these facilities, quarantined in isolation facilities for months, maybe years ahead. Sensible risk management says when a mistake happens, you figure out what went wrong, you improve the system, he told the site. Baker's remarks come amid reports that New Zealanders are breaking out of their facilities. The latest escapee, a person in their 60s, broke the window of a hotel in Auckland on Friday and climbed out of the building. They then scaled the fence and began to knock on the doors of neighboring homes, probably to say, I'm being held captive, please help me. Their escape is the fourth since last Saturday when a woman scaled 2 fences to escape from Auckland's Pullman Hotel. She was out of isolation for more than an hour. Oh my gosh. On Tuesday, a 32-year-old man snuck through a gap in the Stamford Plaza fencing and visited an inner-city supermarket. I reported on that before. The third person to have allegedly escaped from managed isolation was Martin James McViker. He allegedly absconded from the Distinction Hotel in Hamilton on Thursday before entering a nearby liquor store and reportedly buying a 4-pack of Left Blonde and a bottle of Pinot Noir. In mid-June, New Zealand announced its military would step in to oversee the country's quarantine facilities and strengthen border requirements following a slip-up that allowed 2 people with COVID-19 to move around the country. Well, I guess New Zealand is falling into communism. We're going to go right with them if we don't really stay diligent. MakeAmericans.freeagain.com. Please join our initiative. I need to represent lots of people in order to do what I have in mind to do. And this I saved for last because I wanted to leave an impression with you. I want you to think long and hard about this. A partnership involving Gavi, which is a vaccine alliance funded by Bill Gates and the Rockefeller Foundation, interesting characters both. MasterCard and Trust Stamp, an identity authentication company, will be testing a biometric digital identity system, vaccination record, and payment system, all on one platform on poor, uneducated people in West Africa. Trust Stamp, which received a massive amount of funding from MasterCard, launched its digital identity system in 2018 and now will be integrated into the Gavi MasterCard Wellness Pass. This links a person's vaccination records with MasterCard's click-to-pay system. MasterCard says it is committed to centralized record keeping of childhood immunization and committed to a world without cash. Gavi, Gates-funded, committed $3.5 million, which was matched by another $3.5 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the plan is to integrate a COVID vaccine program into this program as soon as it's available. So everybody gets the vaccine, you get your little stamps and tattoos, and we know who's allowed to be out and about. Trust Stamp's biometric program uses a technology called Evergreen Hash that creates a 3D mask based on a single picture of a person's face. The hash is updated every time a child or adult gets another vaccine. Trust Stamp CEO Gareth Genner says, the hash evolves over time, just as you evolve. This is not the only system in place for tracking humans. Contact tracing has been used by police department to track protesters. An Israeli firm's technology is being used in Rhode Island to identify future COVID hotspots and individuals who are likely to get COVID in the future. Now, how do you identify somebody as likely to get COVID in the future? This supposedly allows governments to plan. Plan exactly what? What is perhaps most alarming about this new Wellness Pass initiative is that it links these dual-use digital solutions to cashless payment solutions that could soon become mandated so that you'll never be able to pay cash for anything again, and an additional way to track you will not only be to track whether or not you're getting your vaccinations, but where you're spending money so that the government will always know where you are. Doesn't that just warm your heart? Yeah. This is scary stuff, people. And what they're going to do is they're going to use this system, this Trust Stamp vaccine record and payment system. They're going to experiment with it on poor people in West Africa. You know, the Gates Foundation has a history of doing some pretty terrible things in African countries. They've been asked to leave a couple of countries. for some of the unethical things that they've done. More on that in the workshops on Friday night and Saturday this week on our upcoming book, COVID Operation. It's despicable to go into a poor country and do this type of thing to uneducated people who don't have the will to fight back. I'd fight back, I'd file a lawsuit, I'd do something, but I wouldn't let it happen. These people don't have the capacity to do that, which is, I guess, why they chose them. So isn't it nice to have MasterCard keeping track of your health, keeping track of where you spend money, and the government knowing if you might be at risk of developing COVID-19, identify hotspots so that there can be prophylactic intervention. Wouldn't you love to get picked up on the front steps of your house one day? We've decided you're at risk of developing COVID-19, so we're just going to quarantine you for a couple of weeks. We're going to see people being abducted and just disappearing in our society if we don't do something about this, because this is what happens in communist countries, and we're certainly careening in that direction now. With that, I'll say enough for now. Please let anybody know about this who you think should know this information. Once again, my email address is pampopper@msn.com. I will be back to you tomorrow with more news.